like, well, you're not going anywhere if you're not learning. Like life is a learning journey. You never stop learning. You don't graduate year 12 and just like, that's enough. And I did that for a while and it stagnated me and I got really sick and really numb and really depressed. And it was like only when I start to find the things that brought me joy and interest, like when you find something that naturally interests you, there is an inertia like no other, where you will stay up all hours of the night researching, looking, searching for answers, because ultimately you're searching for your truth, and the things that feel right for you. And I think that's the same with our children, is we don't need to force them into things. They're going to find things that they just naturally want to do. They'll spend hours working in the wood shop, they'll spend hours welding sculptures or whatever. It's just giving the allowance for that, and the openness to just let them go on their own journey. And
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that in our household we don't use the God word. I think that resonates for some and not for others. But the idea that our children are whole and here to not even break everything down. I think the system's breaking itself down, but they are here to create the new, and they've come in with that set of instructions. Like I think the idea that they are the complete package from the universal field, and even more impervious to the enslavement that we've been programmed with. That's why we're unshackling ourselves so fast.
yeah.
And it's funny because I know that, well, you chose to free birth. I kind of accidentally free births my last one because the midwives didn't make it. And it was stop, start, stop, start. But inherent in that was an absolute trust in my own body. And I think like some of us, I feel like for you, you're coming in with already knowing that. I learnt it through experiences. And so that last birth, I was like, holy smokes, like I got this worked out, and then that kid, our fourth, is so much the complete package and got so much of his own mindset that I can't deny. It's nothing to do with anything that I'm doing. Like he just is himself, right? And so I think that's kind of what you're saying with that. Children from God, they're the whole package, and they
absolutely. They don't need any external validation. They are so complete and certain and whole in themselves that it's just like, why would I even bother looking outside? Like, and it's so beautiful to witness as a parent. And it's so funny. I remember going to a homeschool meetup, and I'm just radically authentically myself. Like I always say, I was born a rebel, and that's why my dad named me Jillian Rumble the Rebel, because, I was born upside down and backwards. And so I feel like that's how my consciousness developed. And it's so funny because I always just speak my truth. And I was at a homeschool meetup, and one of the moms just looked at me and she goes, so were you like just born awake, or did you just learn this stuff? And I had to laugh. Yeah. And I was kind of like, well, kind of in both. Yeah, definitely. Like I was born remembering things from past lives that, that made my religious mother terribly uncomfortable. And as much as she tried to bash that out of me with religious training, it just didn't feel right. We all have to find our own way to source. And I always say, like, my mission statement in life is I am here for fun, joy, and beauty. And that's it. It's that complicated and that simple, And so, like, I knew right from the get-go that I was just going to free birth my babies. And my first one, I got to that transition stage of birth, and I just, was 24 hours in, and it was just me and my husband because everyone thought I was insane for not going the medical system. And I just didn't really know what was happening. Like, you're so out of your conscious mind. And then I ended up having a hospital birth with him and absolutely getting butchered and traumatized. And I just made the very conscious decision, because I knew my daughter was coming at some point. I had already met her in my dreams. That it was just like, I trust my body. I trust my body. I trust this process. I mean, I've one of these radical people that have left my body multiple times, and there's no fear of going beyond. But it's so amazing to see in birth that there is wisdom that the body knows that the mind just can't comprehend. And I
Mm,
think that's what spooks so many people out, is they're like, but what if this and what if that and what if I'm not in control? And it's like, honey, just get prepared. You are not in control of this. Your
yeah.
body is going to do what it needs to do. And what really encouraged me is I heard a doctor talking about a woman who was in a coma for like, I don't even know how many years. I think it was like something like 11 years. And she had a baby while she was in a coma, and her body still birthed it naturally. And it was
Yes.
just like, that is freaking phenomenal. So I've just had this unwavering trust. And that's, I think, ultimately what birth is it's a woman's greatest initiation into her full power,
Yes.
into her full sovereignty. And she goes, I know what it took to get this baby here, and I'm not going to let anybody gaslight me or tell me what I need to do. Like,
Mm.
as if I'm not qualified to guide this child in life, you
Ain't
know?
that the truth? I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
actually, and I think birth by design has been industrialized for that very reason. It's not,
Mm,
I know that we're told it's for safer reasons and so forth, and it always has a place that, that medical care. Obviously, I came from a medical field, but I still think the intention is very much so women aren't aware of their power, because when you
yeah.
do birth on your terms and
Mm,
you are in communication with your baby in that labor land that you go to, where you leave
yeah.
your body to do what it needs to do, but you are in communication with your baby's soul, or as you were saying, going and getting the baby's soul. Um, that that makes you real. Nothing's the same after that. And
No.
it can't be, because you've glimpsed what's possible, and we realize that the rest of it is, you know, for someone else's convenience or amusement. Goodness knows why, but it ain't the
Yeah.
truth.
No, and like there's so many ancient traditions, and like a lot of like what we were talking about with moon cycles, and then now moving into birth and planting, lotus birth and planting the baby's placenta. These aren't new age ideas. These are ancient traditions that tie the baby's spirit to the land, so the land knows, hey, this is who's walking on me. I know your energetic imprint. I'm going to look after you. Um, yeah, it's, and then that just carries forward into the radical responsibility. Like, why would I let somebody else instill their values in my children before I get to instill my beliefs and values in my children? And you really
Yes.
have to weigh up what's more important, going along to get along, or raising somebody who's going to be there for you for the rest of your life and look after you, and who has innate trust and, open communication with you. Like,
Mm,
I just see so many youth acting out of resentment and fear and being pissed off that they were forced through a system that just didn't nurture or nourish them.
mm,
And, nobody's going to understand your children better than you.
yes.
Nobody. Like, and there's so many, the whole point of homeschooling is to observe your child,
Mm,
look at what their natural interests are,
mm,
and just nurture that. There doesn't have to be like taking the course and bringing it into the home, the course curriculum. I mean, that works for some people, but like, my son has autism, and his modus operandi is ecstatic joy. And if it's not bringing him ecstatic joy, it's like trying to wrangle a bull through a doorway. It's just like, oh my God, what I'm fighting I'm fighting a losing battle. Um, but when I can nurture, like, okay, I've looked at your birth chart and your divine blueprint. So like one thing we can really do to understand our children's kind of uh, consciousness and the patterns that affect how their emotional behaviors are is just understanding their divine blueprints through things like reading their astrology chart or getting it read by somebody. We've got human design. We've
Mm,
got tools like numerology, like understanding the birth date and how that plays out in their life path, in their karmic path, in the lessons they're here to learn, where they can be of gift and of service to the world, and just really understanding those. And like those are things, tools that I've utilized for my own family. And even my husband looks at me and he's like, that is incredible that you can get all of that from looking at the numbers in my birth chart. Like, he goes, if I had known this information when I was younger, like,
yes.
my life would have been radically different. And especially if my parents understood this. So, like not being afraid to look outside the box and go, how can I better understand you and nurture that and help you grow in this direction, you know?
I have a sneaking suspicion that if more parents did that, say that was like a birth present for a baby being born, uh,
I do that.
that yeah,
I
well,
make
but
I
can you,
make birth charts.
well, that's a beautiful thing because I think that informed parenting, we're always looking for some kind of help because we are community focused, aren't we, in terms of the village raising the baby. But the problem is we've created our village through a bunch of so-called experts that then give advice that don't encourage us to check whether that feels like a truth for us. Like, the
Yeah.
controlled crying and things like that. There might be some people that resonate with that, but I would imagine, you know, almost 100% of new mothers, it would not resonate with to leave their baby crying. So that's an example where we've created a community for raising these children, but we're going to almost false prophets and to books that don't resonate, and we're not looking at the child, and we're certainly not checking what seems like a truth for us, what seems right for us. And what you're talking about again is not about putting kids into boxes or labels, but it's actually about using tools that can inform us and create an intelligence about how we approach them. And like human design's been fantastic for us. I've only gone superficially so far with the kids, but
Yeah.
it's created an awareness about where their superpowers are and why certain things land for them and some things don't. So it changes then how I parent. I create an agility in terms of, how I interact with them from that standpoint. It's very helpful.
Yeah, and that's right. Like that's why I do like numerology charts for babies that are born, and I really encourage parents to look at that is because it's like, look, you've birthed this human and they have some very strong energy in terms of like placements in their chart, and you really just want to understand how can I best nurture them and grow that, and without them growing up resenting you for, forcing them through a system they didn't want to do. And I think that like I have this thing where I'm like, truth is objective because it's different for everybody. And it's really just muscle testing and just feeling, does this feel true in my body?
Yes.
Because I know when there's been moments where I've been, confronted with something that's like, it just doesn't feel right. I know that they're all
Mm.
saying, like, oh, yeah, you should do this or do that. But I'm like, in my being of beings, I know I am not doing that. Like, that makes me feel sick to my stomach with the
Mm.
thought of doing that to my child or to myself or to somebody else, Like, and it's just going, like, how does this make me feel? And that's part of, what's been stripped out of the education system is that bodily wisdom to understand, does this feel true for me?
Yes.
And really taking time to contemplate ideas rather than being forced to make rash decisions.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Well, the system is intentionally set up so that there's no spaciousness for that because it wouldn't work for the collective. You can't, have a whole bunch of people who are all individuals all doing the same thing if we actually listen to what that individual was feeling. But
yeah.
when you, I think, parent from that place of getting your child to be aware of that, what that does as a confirmation as a parent, it just is so affirming. I think because, as you're
Mm,
saying, you're parenting in a way that perhaps you would have liked to have been parented as well. And so you can feel the generational crack just starting to dissipate because you
yeah.
stop it at this generation, right?
So, it was so beautiful witnessing that in the last birth that I partook in. It was just this father holding his beautiful newborn son, a good 10-pounder.
Mm.
And he just looked at this precious, fresh baby, right? Like just out of mom. And he goes, I don't know how long this intergenerational abuse has been going, but the buck stops here. And, you're just looking at this pure child, and you never imagine about why you would ever be so angry as to hit it. And
Yeah.
again, that's just old programs falling away, and and as those fall away, we're finding new ways to parent our children and just creating, little things that just really help. Having these, like, I have this little thing here where we have the AAA rule, and it's just acknowledging what's happening, appreciating what we have and what we've learned, and allowing the course to run its path. So
Mm.
acknowledgement, appreciation, and allowance. And that's a really beautiful gift to give your children. And I think when we can trust our children from a young age to, like, do things, it builds that trust for life, because then it's like, I know when he's a teenager, I don't need to worry about him going out and doing too
Mm.
many stupid things, like,
Mm.
they're going to experiment, but at the same time, it's like you have that trust that I know what's right for you. And I
Yeah.
know that if it doesn't feel right in your body, you won't do it, and that's really important.
Yeah, and that takes like a
That's-
level of surrender, because I know that my kids now span almost 17 to 9, and uh, I actually use that in my language with them, and I say I trust you, like you have to make the decision. And I'm not saying that I prepared them completely for whatever decisions they're going to go and make, but I also have to trust that their innate wisdom will guide them. And sometimes their innate wisdom is going to guide them to an experience that creates a few bumps and bruises. But that's their right as well to live their life in that manner. I think that we kind of can sometimes get caught up from this new age parenting point of view of protecting them at any cost. But they need to know their truth. And on a soul level, they, have a set of things that they've come into experience. Maybe they've had the perfect
mm,
existence previously and they're up for a few bumps and bruises this time round. And
yeah.
part of that is holding that space for them to do that relatively safely. I don't want my kids to get hurt, but I do want them to experience life. Otherwise, what are they doing here? They're a pedestrian.
Yeah, and I think that's something that another thing that's been stripped. The system was created to make factory workers,
Yes.
not an evolved human consciousness. And I really feel like that's what happens kind of in their teenage years, is that they start to feel the hero's journey, the call to adventure. And that and you can't say, like, oh no, don't do that, because even if you say it, they're gonna do it anyways, because
Definitely.
there's this thing of, like, yeah, there's wisdom of the elders, but you have to be of a certain consciousness to acknowledge the wisdom of the elders first. So there's always going to be this call to adventure, to
Yeah.
want to go out in the world and try things, and look, you learn from them. You don't repeat the same mistake twice, hopefully.
Mm.
And it's the hero's journey is the call to adventure and the departure of, like, leaving home or going out on your own. And then you're faced with obstacles and challenges and confrontations, and it's learning to move through those. That is your initiation. It's like, how do you cope with those things? And sometimes it's like an ego death and a rebirth. And
Mm.
then the third part of the hero's journey is the return back home, where you share that wisdom with the people in your community, and you share that. And I think that, like, we need to start integrating that back into our collective consciousness, is that we're all here to learn something. And
Yes.
ultimately, at the end of the day, it's compassion for all things and beings. Like, I think that's the hardest part for me, is I've tried to wake up so many people, but you
Mm.
just have to come to this humble place of, like, everyone is exactly where they need to be.
Yes.
And whether it's something traumatic that wakes them up, or it's a simple conversation, everyone is where they need to be, and they can only be woken up when they're ready for it.
That's
Um,
exactly right. And to insert our wish upon that would not be in harmony with what nature would intend anyway. I mean, I think there are
yeah.
definitely always going to be dominant plants in your backyard, but they don't ever assert themselves to the point where nothing else can flourish in that space. So there has to be a bit of
Yeah.
give and take and a bit of humility and a bit of grace. And I actually think that we can hold a vibration that's far more powerful than anything we're going to say verbally anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And, like, We've moved from the age of Pisces, which is really about top-down structure and structure and order and the way things have always been done. And we've moved into this age of Aquarius where now our feelings and our energy field, like when you come in contact with someone who's just slimy, you're like, ew, get me out of here.
Yeah.
You can sense people's intentions. And I think that's the thing about like children that are coming in with autism is just, and all of these other different neurological things, is that they're so hypersensitized that they will match whatever frequency they're in.
Mm,
And sometimes that can be overwhelming from an external point of view. Like, oh my God,
mm,
my kid's having a complete meltdown and I can't control it. But it's just, they're so sensitive that it's almost it's a beautiful gift,
it
like
is.
music moves through them in a different way, energy moves through them in a different way, and it's a superpower to be that sensitive.
Mm,
And it's really like, if you're that sensitive, do you really want to be exposing yourself to things that are toxic people, toxic shows, toxic thoughts? It's really
mm,
that upgrade. And I think that where we're at in the world is that, what I've learned from cooking medicine all these years is that you have to boil off the impurities
mm,
to get the stabilization, to get the purity. Because if there's any stagnant water or sludge at the bottom of the pot, that's going to cause mold and fungus issues later on. So, I feel like whenever we go through these intense times of change, there's just this high boiling point of like, yes, things are intense, but we're boiling off that which does not serve us or burning off that which does
mm.
not serve us. And, collectively, that's really just what we're going through right now, is the boiling off of the impurities. And just knowing that there's a pure process that's alchemizing right now, and that's beautiful. And that starts with being at home and connecting with your children and connecting with the land and learning the wisdom of like, you know, the leaves falling off the tree is just like,
Mm.
okay, the tree's dying back for winter, but it's not the end of the cycle.
Yeah.
Those dead leaves are going to create fertility for the next cycle. And isn't that a beautiful thing to know that there's something so much more than just the present moment that we're going through? There's innate wisdom that
Mm,
transcends through nature into humans, into consciousness, and just trusting that process is a big sigh of relief.
absolutely. And we don't go chopping the tree down when it's lost all its leaves anyway. So,
No.
there's an appreciation and a grace that happens with nature around us. We just don't extend it to ourselves often. And that's,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we're learning to do is just to take a breath and go, okay, what's the long view here? And I love the idea of burning off the impurities because that is so true. That is what it feels like is happening, and it's deeply uncomfortable, but it's meant to, you know, create an awareness in the greater community that there is a shift happening and it needs to happen. And that discomfort is purposeful. I mean, it's very much like
Yeah.
birth. I know that
I was
people,
just gonna say it sounds exactly like the
it,
birth,
that's
It's
right. I
like
mean, I guess that's
the
why it's
learning the
a rebirth.
uncomfortableness.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I made the conscious choice before we had our first to not regard the labor symptoms and signs to be pain. It was just feedback of the body doing workload, and it shifted my experience so dramatically that other people don't seem to choose to have access to that thought flow. But I'm like, it's not painful, it just
Mm,
is a feeling, and it
mm.
it warrants attention because it's what it's probably the single biggest thing you'll ever do in your life. Like, I'm sure you could probably,
Yeah.
climb some mountains and do some other things, but growing a new human and then bringing them earthside is like probably the coolest thing that you can do out there. And so we need to pay attention to that. We need to be present. We need to have reverence. We need to surrender. We need to have trust. And we need to shift our consciousness to match the magnitude of that event.
Yeah. And you're not just birthing a human, you're birthing a whole cosmos. Like
Mm,
that's the other thing, is that like, the elements of nature can be found in our hand. Like there's water, earth, fire, air, ether, and so and also like the thumb is Mars, the index finger is Jupiter, you've got Saturn, Mercury, like you have the cosmos inside you. And so you're not just birthing a baby, you are birthing an entire cosmos. Like that's kind of phenomenal if you ask me. And it's I'm constantly learning. It's funny what you were saying about burning off the impurities, and when the tree's dead, you don't just cut it down, because every time I prune my trees over winter, that they get their annual haircut, and I'm cutting off the dead branches. And as I'm cutting off the dead branches, I think, like, what am I cutting out of my life that's no longer serving me? Um and I'm just very conscious about the way as I'm pruning my trees, I think about, like, what are the dead branches that I can prune out of my own life, that are going to stimulate further growth. Like, okay, that's just a distraction. That's not propelling me forward on my growth and my path and my spiritual journey. So I can just kindly cut that branch off, or cut that relationship, or, just applying the laws of and the rules of nature and the cycles of nature to my own personal journey and growth and family. Yeah, it's just, I'm always learning, and that's the beautiful thing. Is somebody once said to me, like, "Oh, you got to stop learning and start earning," and I almost choked when I heard that, and I was like, "Okay, I don't know who told you that, but just stop right now,"
Yeah, that's
because
exactly right. That sounds ass about to me.
yeah, yeah. I'm like, well, you're not going anywhere if you're not learning. Like, life is a learning journey. You never stop learning. You don't graduate year 12 and just, like, that's enough. And I did that for a while, and it stagnated me, and I got really sick and really numb and really depressed. And it was like only when I start to find the things that brought me joy and interest, like when you find something that naturally interests you, there is an inertia like
Mhm.
no other, where you will stay up all hours of the night researching, looking, searching for answers, because ultimately you're searching for your truth, and the things that feel right for you. And I think that's the same with our children. Is we don't need to force them into things. They're going to find things that they just naturally want to do. They'll
Mm.
spend hours working in the wood shop, they'll spend hours welding sculptures or whatever. It's just giving the allowance for that, and the openness to just let them go on their own journey. And yeah,
So
it's
true.
beautiful and powerful. It's so
Mm.
beautiful and
Oh,
powerful
it's
just
so true. And
observing.
I mean, in fact, like I've talked about this before, wherein we don't ever question a toddler and their love of learning and the way they go and explore something until they're sort of sated to the point where they've gone, okay, I've reached a point where I need to do integration or do something different. But we suddenly then don't apply that to our kids. But and even ourselves, and that's exactly right, that limiting idea that we need to learn through institutions. And sometimes we do get really great information from, an organized course or an education institution. There's definitely the case there. I was very grateful to learn ambulance, in a classroom and then go and apply it on the road rather than the other way around. But then we can have a conversation like we're having right now. And I mean, I'm going to need a lie down just to integrate everything that you've said, because there's just so much wisdom in there. The idea of that complete embodiment of conscious living, where you are physically doing an action like pruning a tree and then thinking, I'm using this as an energetic expression to make changes in my life that are healthy for me, and creating even that permission around that as well. Yeah, I'm going to go back and listen to this multiple times, Jill, because it's just so beautiful. I have loved this conversation. Do you have any
Yeah.
closing thoughts or wisdom you want to share with us? I'm sure we can handle one more.
Um, I think the most important thing for anyone, wherever you are on your journey, is just your children in the first 7 years of their life are in theta state, and that means they're in hypnosis, and they're just watching and recording and repeating. And ultimately, what you do in front of them on a daily basis programs who and how they function in the world. And so, if you can show them what a healthy relationship looks like, if you can show them what fun looks like, what joy looks like, what beauty looks like, and just in your daily actions, I think that you have the ability to change the world just by being in your own space. But I think the most important thing is just to be a living embodiment of what fearless living looks like. That is the most important thing. If you take one thing away, how can I be an embodiment of fearless living for my children? And every decision you make, ask yourself, is this coming from love or is this coming from fear? And catch yourself. Be humble enough to catch yourself and really just go, okay, I feel some vulnerability here. I feel some anxiousness. I know that the antidote is love. And how do I go about acting this and being this love in the world that I need to see and that my child needs to see right now? Is it taking out my sword of truth and standing up for them? Is it taking radical responsibility and keeping, my baby bird close under my wing? How can you be a living embodiment for fearless living? And try your best to do it in a gracious way. And I know graciousness isn't easy.
My goodness.
But yeah, I would say that's
the alarm's going off and everything. Life is starting to come back into my field, and I'm thinking, my fearless living, how am I going to do that? I've had a kid appear at the door.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's right. We must be ready to complete this conversation. But fearless living in a conscious way. Jill, thank you so much for your time. As I said, I think that there's just it's a ridiculous amount of wisdom that was poured into this conversation. I'm so grateful for your generosity and just for the sparkle that is you. Thank you for coming into my life.
Yeah, I was going to say at the beginning, if anyone's listening, just make sure you have a pen and paper on hand because you might need to pause and rewind this episode a couple times. There's quite a few, cosmic downloads that come through. So yeah, thank you for the honor and the joy of being here. And it was just an absolute joy to share whatever flowed through us.
Yes, always gold. Thanks, folks. Until next time, stay well, stay beautiful.
Hey Quanta folks, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Birth is transformational. And it can be transformational in the right way and in the not so right way. So how do we arm ourselves to be really prepared for this incredible experience? Well, you wouldn't go out and run a marathon without any kind of training. You'd at least do occasional stretches, and the High Vibe Birth course, which is self-paced, available at the QuantiMama.com website, is available for you. You get to luxuriate in all of the ideas and transformational techniques and the beautiful information that can only have a positive effect on your birth. So get fit for your birth marathon and head to QuantiMama for the High Vibe Birth course. Beautiful Quanta folks. At QuantiMama, we have a mandate that we feel so passionate about. We want and we are raising the community's vibration and frequency and consciousness through parenting and birth experiences. Such incredible, transformational experiences that will shape you as a person and are the very fabric of life. Do you want to find out how to high vibe your experience even more? Then QuantiMama is your place. Head there for the High Vibe Birth course, ultimate preparation for birthing. Head there if you want to re-engage your child in the love of learning for the Take the Leap course, which is a deschooling course for parents. There's beautiful mind movies, and obviously this podcast is there, and we are here to support you. So head there for all the juice.